on this computer. We are recording. Okay, so for our next, because Ray Roth is coming in. Okay, so for our next study, so we have this week and we have next week still doing a new Reformation. So the 17th will be our last Friday on a new Reformation. Then on the 24th, we're going to start a new study, right? And
unless you guys want to take a break.
No.
And it doesn't matter. Like if you can take a break, and then like it's like people just can kind of flow in and out of these studies. Yes. So I didn't do a poll. Daggone it. So we have two options. We took kind of a loose idea last time after everybody hung up. One is, and I'm going to pull them up on Amazon just so you can see. So they're both Adam Hamilton books. And here's what I'm going to say is I know some people are always hesitant, like we do so much Adam Hamilton. We actually really only try to do one Adam Hamilton book a year. However, because we have access to Amplify Media, which has become very helpful, it has all these videos. And not surprising, Mr. Hamilton is like, all of his stuff is on there, like all of it. And so it's actually convenience at this point. And his videos are lengthier. So they're a good solid 13 to 16 minutes. So they're a little meatier. And where that gets us is if you don't want to read the book, because a lot of people are doing a lot of different studies right now. You don't have to. You can just watch the video, which is just nice to have that as a media option versus reading. So that's our reason for doing Adam Hamilton. So we have two options. One is, and some of you may know this, how to make sense of the Bible.
And this we would say, it's one of Adam's earlier books, and it is it will raise questions that we've been talking about context, biblical interpretation, little bit about how we got the Bible and so forth.
It looks a little different now. So some people I read this years ago and it had a different cover.
Yes, mine has a different cover.
But this is what the cover looks like now. I don't know why all this, making sense of the Bible, rediscovering the power of Scripture. It's a little bit of a longer book, but again, there's videos for everything. So if you don't want to have the book, there's plenty of videos, and they're meatier videos. So that's the one option, is making sense of the Bible. The other Hamilton is the Gospel of John Hamilton. Is this one, John, the Gospel of Light. So this is the other Hamilton that has, and you can see all the options, like you can buy it Kindle, hardcover, paperback. So those are the two options we'd like to explore. And the other thing is we also wanted to continue doing a biblical study, just because, again, it feels like right now there's a lot of other studies going on, especially around anti-racism, and we want to give space for that. And so if we stay with a biblical study, it always flows into the intersection of our faith. So it's always relevant, because Scripture is relevant. Oh, imagine that. Okay, so let's go ahead and entertain some questions. Michelle, go ahead.
What about doing one and then the other?
That's certainly a possibility. Yeah, we can definitely do that. Not opposed. So go ahead.
Well,
go ahead.
I like making sense of the Bible. That's what I'd like to do.
Okay.
You like making sense of the Bible, huh?
Yeah.
I like trying to find the sense in the Bible.
That too.
Okay. So I think I was going to try to do a poll, but I totally forgot. So, and there's 19 of us on this, so we'll be the voting, makers here. So it's just going to be majority rules. So maybe we could just do a little hand raise, and I could do it that way if you all feel comfortable. Vote, raise your hand if you want making sense of the Bible.
Oh, yeah, I'd say so.
Okay, it's fine. Okay, so so sorry, Jonathan, Michelle, and Ray. We can do Gospel of John after. So maybe that's what we can do. We can do making sense of the Bible first, and then we'll do the Gospel of John And that way, and unless Faith, you feel like, I guess the only question is if there's an all church experience that we have to incorporate, which we don't know yet, that would probably rank. Oh, Ray abstained. He's fine with either one. Perfect. I love the, I didn't ask him. And maybe Michelle abstained too.
Oh,
Either one is fine with me.
Okay, great.
To be
All right,
fair,
perfect.
it
Great.
is.
Okay. So then that's what we're going to do. So we will, I will send, I'll do a little write-up to give to Victoria. So it will be in the e-news and
I'll make an offer on behalf of Dana, but, well, and I could do it too. If you have you want the book, but you might have difficulty getting it from Prime, we can have it sent to you.
yeah.
I've discovered that now. That's my new learning for this week. I can have my things sent to another address.
Yeah. So we can. So if you want the book and you're having a hard time getting it, or you don't know how to get it shipped through, like I can just ship it to you. So just send me an email separately from this. Don't type it in the chat. Just send me an email separately and I'll get it to you. But again, the videos are there. So if you don't want the book, you don't have to get the book, and we will have to start right at 9:45 because these are solid 15-minute videos.
Okay. I will order it,
Okay.
and see what happens.
All right, just send me an email and let me know. And Ruth does say she doesn't want to do 2 Hamiltons in a row. I hear you. I'm not necessarily a fan. So maybe I'll research and I'll try to get with John Shaver and find out what the plan is as we move, because this will take us into August. So maybe I'll see what his plans are for the fall.
Mhm.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and just put people on mute and unmute Faith. Okay, so why don't we go ahead and just open in prayer, and then we will get started.
Okay. Let us be together in prayer. Let us just take one deep breath. Lord, you are our refuge and our strength. You are the one where we find our center and our peace. You are the one who keeps us still in the midst of the madness of the world. You are the one who gives us purpose, a mission, a ministry. You are the one who guides us and walks the way with us. You are the one who gives us courage. In these days, O God, we turn to you once again for all those things. And we ask them not only for ourselves. We ask for these gifts that we might be strengthened, encouraged, empowered, and able to bring your blessing, your word, your truth, and most of all, your love to the world. Help us to withdraw as Luther did, and in that withdrawing find new strength and new purpose. But help us, like Luther, also to go out and confront and challenge and convict. All these things we ask in Jesus' name, trusting in him, trusting in you. Amen.
All righty. Okay, so for today, I'll shrink this, get our little agenda up. Okay, so here is our agenda. So we thought we'd talk a little bit about just some of the history or context that was in both the video and in the book, and maybe just ask, what was the Edict of Worms? And what happened to Martin Luther following the edict? So maybe just somebody could just give a little summary of what they feel like they heard and or read. And we can kind of, that way everybody's on the same page. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing this.
The answer's in the book. You can look at.
Yeah. Or would you prefer Faith to do it? I mean, that's fine.
No, no. That's fine. This is while you're thinking. This is something. Well, the kids, when you teach this in confirmation and other classes, they have great fun with this because they love to call it the diet of worms.
That's what I.
It's like, why was Luther on a diet of worms?
We had this conversation in my house. So go ahead, Paul.
So Wikipedia says that a bishop employed 3 different critics who attempted to refute what Luther was talking about. And it does point out also that Luther did not start out intending that this was a revolution, but that it was simply a academic discussion. That's what the 95 Theses were. The Catholic Church made a horrible misstep, and that bishop made a horrible misstep when they began to persecute him. So I think in the Diet of Worms, it was the last of the critics who confronts him. And the result of that was the Edict of the Holy Roman Empire.
And what was the edict? What did they say?
That he was excommunicated and that he was an outlaw. And what it meant for somebody to be an outlaw is that any person could kill that outlaw without any repercussion.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Ruth, go ahead.
Didn't it also make it illegal to read anything that he wrote?
Yeah, I think anything would have been illegal by him, right?
But I mean, nobody could read or possess anything that he wrote, which is like huge.
Yeah. I mean, at least they made one progressive step. They didn't kill him. Barbara.
What I thought was kind of interesting, that it seemed that even the Catholic Church changed right away, because suddenly one of the priests got married and all kinds of stuff happened.
But
Even
they
in the-
didn't remain Catholics.
Oh,
They were part of another Reformation. Now, the Roman Catholic Church itself underwent what was known as the Counter-Reformation, because with all of these pressures that were being put on it from Luther and Zwingli and Calvin and all of the others, they tried to respond. In some ways, it was too little, too late, because by that time, those forces were already in motion. But prior to Luther, you had basically the Roman Catholic Church, and John, I'm correct, I'm not, the Eastern Orthodox Church as well. So you had a center in Rome, and you had a center in Constantinople.
And those groups had already split.
Yes, they'd
Yeah.
already split. But the power, I mean, and Rome it may have been Holy Roman Empire, but it was very, very political as well.
June asked, I'd like a little history of the Roman Empire and Vatican. My history is bad, but I thought the Roman Empire didn't exist anymore in the 1500s. Is the Holy Roman Empire different?
Yes.
Well, come over here and tell them. John will give you an answer.
Okay.
He sits here and listens, but he doesn't always.
Basically, the Holy Roman Empire was formed by the powerful kings in Europe and the Pope. And the idea was one of the kings would lead and the Pope would back them. Well, the debate we got to in the time of Luther was there were 2 kings. There was Charles in France, there was Charles in Spain and Francis in France. And they had to choose a new leader, a new king for the Holy Roman Empire. What is not normally known is there was a third candidate, and that third candidate was the elector, the Wise.
Frederick the Wise.
Frederick the Wise, who was backed, believe it or not, by the Pope. Well, he backed out and Charles won, and we ended up with a couple of centuries of war. But that's how it occurred.
Okay. So there was a pope, and then the Pope would say, okay, you can be the king of this place, you can be the king of this place, you can be the king of that place.
I
Yeah, but
never
then
knew
you-
any of that.
Then you had the one that was considered the Holy Roman Emperor, or the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire.
Right.
It was a very insidious relationship between church and state.
There was no separation.
Yes, which you don't want to see again.
I never knew that stuff. Huh.
We could probably have a whole study on that. Ruth, go ahead.
Well, it was also economic too, because the church owned great swaths of land, and they, you know, the people in the church, they had huge riches, and so it was very much intertwined with the economics of Europe as well.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Barbara.
The other interesting part is actually, even though Luther just proclaimed his thesis in Latin, that there was this whatever city council member or whatever he was, Kaspar Nitzel, who translated the thing into German in the next 2 months. I mean, before Christmas, everybody could actually read what is all about Luther and what he wanted and how he is. So I guess people could make up their mind if they really wanted to get him out. I mean, for the common people, that was a big advantage, right, against the Catholic Church.
Not as much as you might think, because most of them were illiterate.
Well, yeah, that's
And so they couldn't read it even though it was in their language.
well.
But-
If they had good friends that perhaps
Yes.
read, then they could get some.
And then you start talking about it, and you know what happens next. Yeah.
Jonathan?
I may have misheard Barbara, but I thought Luther's the one who did the translating from Latin into English, into German for the people while he was at Warburg Castle.
Not
That was the Bible.
right. So Luther translated the New Testament and Psalms or Proverbs while he was
Psalms.
at the castle. But
Right.
before that, the 95 Thesis he wrote in Latin, and somebody took them and translated them into German.
Oh, okay. Right. All right.
He did that deliberately because he was only addressing the scholars.
Correct.
Mhm.
I would like to say that one of the important points I got from the video was that he had to go into this Warburg Castle as a refuge. But while he was there, he could listen to the still small voices of the Lord. And the Lord gave him something to do that turned out to be very valuable for the people, namely translating the New Testament into German, the language of the people. And I find that to be a very important part of this whole thing. So when you have to get into your refuge, listen to the Lord and see what it is you need to be doing next.
Mhm.
So that goes into, that was my question, is what was Luther's mental and spiritual state at Warburg Castle? What were the benefits and the struggles? I think Jonathan pointed out a benefit, but did he struggle?
Luther, it was an extremely complicated man with it seems like so many ups and downs emotionally, and it must have been a very difficult life that he led to accomplish what he did. He was challenged by himself and by the Pope and by God, and everybody was after him. He
There's
felt-
a
Yeah, and I was going to say, how is that? I mean, is that what we experience? Like, is his life any different than maybe what some of us have experienced in our lives? So I think we often tend to put these figures on kind of pedestals, but I'm wondering if there's more of a comparison. Anybody have
There's a sort of funny story that's told about Luther's life. There's lots of stories told about his life, but this is one particular time, and it was after he married Catherine de Bora, who was a nun, and they were married. And it was a time of depression in his life because he was feeling the pressures from all sides. And when he woke up one morning, his wife was all dressed in black. And she was walking around the house with and he said, well, what's the matter? You know, what's going on? And she said something to the effect, well, I'm mourning because God is dead. And it was like, what do you mean God is dead? And she said, well, that's how you're acting. And it was a turning point for his mindset at that point, because she was showing him that, you know, you're acting, you're behaving, you're as if, you know, God will no more. So I just think it's a wonderful story about it.
That's a great story. I love that. Anybody have another thought, reflection? Anybody we haven't heard from want to chime in?
She just must have been a very funny lady.
Mm-hmm. Well, remember, she had to take her own stand against the times. She was a nun.
Yeah, so she actually had to
break with it as well.
So here's another thought: is COVID-19 right now? Is this a time of refuge? Yeah, Joanne is shaking her head. Yes, Mike. Yes. You want to talk on any of that, or?
Let me phrase it. One of the things Dana and I talked about in our discussion this week is the difference between refuge and retreat.
Mm.
And retreat is one of those words. There's a term for them which slips my mind right now, where the word means the opposite of itself. It can mean both things at the same time. So when you say retreat, it can mean, you know, come in and center down and get renewed. But retreat can also mean run away.
Right.
It just depends. And so we spent a little bit of time talking about, particularly in light of where we are now, is it refuge or is it retreat? And what's the difference?
Yeah. June, I have Ray's hand up. And Michelle?
Oh, go with Ray. Go with Ray.
Ray, go ahead. Go ahead, Ray.
Yeah, I was going to say, to answer that question, whether it's a refuge or a retreat, I think a lot depends on our own personalities. And that is that, you know, for COVID-19 right now, as we're sheltered in place, if your personality is more of an introvert type of a person, then you're more likely to be okay with it, you know, not suffer as much as the extrovert, who is going to, you know, kind of go crazy a little bit maybe, and need to get out and need to socialize and all of that. So it depends a lot on your personality, and you know, maybe we would like to think that Christians are having a little better time with this than those without faith, because of the fact that that hope is such a critical part of our religion.
Let's have June, then Michelle, then Barbara.
Did you unmute me?
Yep, you're unmuted.
Okay. I don't know, the longer it goes on, the more it becomes a refuge, I think. I think in the beginning, you know, you just, oh, this is going to be a couple of weeks and then we'll just go back to our normal lives. But, you know, it's gone on a long time now and it seems like a permanent shift, you know, plus all the other, you know, police brutality things and some of the other political things that have been going on. I think it has turned into a time of reflection and refuge that might be a positive thing in the long run.
Michelle, you want to go?
I belong to a thing called Cards for a Cause, and stampers make cards for a rotating monthly cause. And usually we get about 300 cards out to whatever thing it is, whether it be a foster care thing, an animal shelter, or whatever. Last month, we got over, they wrote us back and said, we've just received almost 1,100 cards from you guys. So sometimes sitting in place like Luther can be productive, you know, because.
Oh, that's great.
I thought of that when I read the chapter. I thought, you know, this feels kind of the same, you know, it couldn't do much else. So we sat down and made cards for the animal shelter.
That's a great idea. So it's called, the group is called Cards for Cause?
It's, well, Split Coast Stampers, and then under it, the monthly cards thing is Cards for a Cause.
That is wonderful.
So, yeah, they rotate it every month.
Good. Thank you for sharing that. It's great. Barbara?
Well, I'm thinking also refuge and retreat. It's in this case, it's very similar or the same. I mean, yeah, it's easier for introverts and extroverts, but I mean, it's like even if you're extrovert, you kind of have to. I mean, there's no way, anyways. In the beginning, it was nicer. I thought that was more okay. Nowadays, it kind of gets on my nerves a little bit. But yeah, I mean, people can be productive. I mean, many things. I mean, there's even people who went to jail and wrote books in jail, right? I mean, you kind of, if you stuck somewhere, you can be productive. Some people can, I mean.
The other, oh, go ahead, Kathy.
Kathy, go ahead.
Okay. It also seems to me that there's something in there on the intent of why it's happening. And a retreat in the sense of having to retreat, you know, the more negative connotation is because somebody makes you a refuge. Refuge can be the same thing. You know, somebody's hunting you, you got to hunker down. And it's both of those words seem to have the difference between whether it's something you choose or something you don't choose. That's what I was thinking.
Michelle, do you have a response?
Well, the other thing we added to that, just to throw into your thinking, does the church then become a refuge or a retreat?
Mm-hmm.
Church as a refuge in the sense that it renews, restores, gives it. But for some people, the church is supposed to be a retreat where I don't have to think about the world. Exactly. And I don't want people to remind me of the world in the midst of my church experience. So there's that. So we had some fun discussing that as well.
Yeah, I think when people treat it as a retreat in that way, it becomes very insular. I know people for sure that it becomes an insular, it's all about them and their faith, and it doesn't pay attention to the outside world. Like, get that away from me. I don't know if anybody else has any experience. Mike, go ahead.
Well, I've found this experience to be very disturbing. I find naturally that I'm very comfortable with getting out of the high activity. I find that Zoom is a wonderful way to communicate with people. At the same time, I wind up finding out that it has real limits on how much you can actually participate, because it's very finite. So I spend a lot of time retreating in that I dig into our readings and investigate the options in there. And at the same time, I don't feel like I'm really doing anything to expand the outreach that that I'm totally invested in by being a Christian. So I've found it to be very interior without reaching out, and I'm trying to deal with that.
I think that's a wonderful, thank you, powerful reflection. Is it, you know, there's a positive sense to having this time to read and discern, but then it's also limiting in the sense that we, at times, I know I feel helpless, like what, I should be out doing stuff. I should be out making, you know, and it's hard. Paul, go ahead. You have to unmute yourself. I think you have to accept unmute.
Yeah, I think you clicked me. There's something that Rob said in the video, and that is the most important work we have is the work God does in us. And he also talks about the fact that during all of Luther's struggles in Wittenberg, and actually in Wittenberg as well, what was happening was a transformation of him. And so, Mike, the important thing is, what is God doing in you? You know, now, because I've had the same thing going, gee, I'm not doing much. And in fact, there was about a month and a half where I was sitting on my hands, and it was distressing. Since that time, I have rejoined a Los Altos United Methodist men's group, and I love it. And it's Zoom. I'm now talking with David Haight about furthering the goal of starting up a men's group in
San Diego.
In our church.
Yeah.
So there are things to do.
Yeah.
There are things to do.
Yeah. I think all of us, I mean, I know I can identify with Paul and Mike for sure. So Michelle?
I was just gonna say, yeah, I understand where they're coming from. Couple of weeks into this COVID thing, when it became obvious that we were gonna be at this for a while, I started a hobby that I would not normally have done if life was normal. You know, that I sat down and started working on it because, well, we were gonna be doing this for a while. So there are options out there if you're willing to do them.
So here's a question for our history buffs. And what happened to Dad? Like, this is the question for Dad. It's a history. We can't hear you. Oh, he's got a phone call. Okay. So the author writes that reform brings resistance. What reforms in history, apart from the Protestant Reformation, have brought resistance and why? So that's the first question. And in your own personal life, to what degree have you resisted change? So kind of a reflection on, in our history, what reforms bring resistance and why? And then also in your personal life, where have you resisted change? Joanna, go ahead, Joanna. Yeah, go ahead, you have to, yep, go ahead.
We watched Hamilton last night and talk about resistance that has affected each and every one of us. The outcome of that Revolutionary War on a broad scale, and then just the powerful presence of Hamilton in the formation of the structure of our new country. I really had not realized what a powerful force he was in that. And then personally, you know, this aging process, I find I have resisted it unsuccessfully. It seems to happen. And then I came to the conclusion that the alternative to aging is really not all that appealing at this point. So instead of resisting it, I am trying to embrace it. And it's a healthier attitude.
That's wonderful. Okay. Anyone else have a response? I put the question in the chat, so if you have the chat open, you can see the question, or on your agenda, of course. Ray, go ahead.
Yeah, I can tell you, during an Army career, I changed a lot, you know, growing up with certain, I mean, I think Joanna just made reference to the fact that as we get older, we've experienced a lot more opportunities for change, and sometimes we take them and sometimes we don't. And a lot of it, you know, is a case of personal maturing. We like to think anyway, but I can tell you in the case of, you know, over a career in the Army that, you know, you're so used to doing things the way that the rules are. And then when the rules change, and Faith's kind of shaking her head like, maybe that's true in the Methodist Church as well. You know, but I was drafted into the Army, and when they did away with the draft, you know, I was kind of against that idea. And then I was, I can think of several instances, everything from affirmative action being implemented, and then realizing later on that you know, that was a really good thing the Army started doing in the late 70s and all through the 80s, and, you know, promoting people who may not have met the merit standards, but you know, deserve to have, whether it was, you know, racial primarily, disparities recognized and improved upon. And you know, another example was when the Army went from KP, which a lot of people recognize, kitchen police or kitchen patrol, that privates, or, you know, the junior people in the whole structure would have to go work in the kitchen. And, you know, I did that as a draftee, as a private, for some time. In fact, I spent literally a whole week doing it. When I showed up at Fort Benning with a week before my parachute training jump school started, I spent a week on KP. So I know about that kind of stuff. So then in anyway, whenever it was, late 70s probably, maybe even the early 80s, they did away with KPs and they went to hiring civilians to do that. And I thought, well, you know, this is a horrible decision. And then as you study on it and you get used to seeing it happen, you discover that they saved a whole lot of money by doing that they could hire civilians a lot cheaper than they could pay privates, which, you know, was you know, barely $100 a month. But you know, you get used to these things as you go along, and you know, recently the military changed the rules about accepting gay and lesbian people, for example, and we all kind of thought, well, you know, this is going to be a problem, and a lot of the old school folks were saying, you know, this may not work, and I was kind of struck because, you know, the Marines, local, you know, predominant military branch, have a long history of resisting change. They were the last ones to integrate racially, you know, back in the late 40s when Truman directed the services to integrate. The Marines didn't do it until the early 50s when Eisenhower slammed them, and even then, if you were a Black Marine, you suffered, you know, for decades. You know, I was in a meeting with the Marine General down at MCRD, and he not only commands MCRD, the Recruit Training Depot, but he also commands the western half of the United States Recruiting Command for the Marines, which is, you know, he has thousands of recruiters working for him, and is responsible for bringing those people into the Marine Corps. And so, you know, when that rule came out, we didn't even have to ask him. He just stood up and he said, you know, he says, there's been a lot of talk about all this. He says, we've got the orders now. He says, the way that I look at it is that I just opened up, you know, 10% of the population to be recruited into the Marines, and that's a good thing for me. So you know, you take the positive. So, you know, the resistance to change is going to happen. But, you know, as I look back on my life, there's been some pretty substantial changes on a professional basis. At least I can say that we've survived and actually thrived as a result of.
Absolutely. Willeen, did you have a comment? Yeah, go ahead.
Yes. I was going to ask Joanna for some advice on how you accept the physical changes of in your body.
I'll talk to you later, Willeen.
Sounds like a side group we need to start.
It's a good idea to say it. You embrace it, and I'm just curious. I want to know how you're doing it. But anyway, that's something that I'm working on too.
Okay, so I have to just interject and say, clearly I'm a little younger than you, lovely.
Yeah, quite a bit younger.
I'm now a little concerned that I need to get into a group because I'm always constantly like, I've got to get, like, I'm starting to age. And I'm 45. So what? I need you to be my role models. Tell me it's all going to be great.
No, Joanna said it best. You consider the alternative.
Yeah.
And wherever we are, it's better than the alternative of not being here.
Sometimes I
A little
wonder.
help from my friends.
Yeah, I agree, Joanna. There are days when I get up and go,
God, I want to be with you.
But Dana, I wanted to point out to you that most of us in this grew up in a time when the motto was don't trust anybody over 30. And then we turned 30. And I thought, well, maybe I can extend that a little bit. But then when my daughter turned 30, I thought, oh, shoot, I really am old now. So it kind of, you may still be in that category.
I don't know. I think my dad always says, it's a good day when you're above ground. That's what he always says that. So I'm like, Dad, that's horrifying.
no, it isn't. No, it isn't. It's right on.
Great. This is awesome. Unhelpful to me.
Time to go into the small groups.
All right. It's 10:44. Maybe we should just stay. I think this is working fine. I just put the question in, and then I call on people as they raise their hand.
Okay.
But I do want to get to the small group because this is the one thing he didn't talk about in the video, and it was in the book. And so the author proposes kind of 3 revelations that come out of taking time in refuge. I do have all the descriptions in the agenda. So if you have the agenda, it's helpful to see them. But this is, I think, his own reflection of what it's like to be in a time of refuge. And the first revelation or reflection he had is God uses what we are able to do. And we've already started to talk a little bit about that. And it says during Luther's time and actually, let me just share the screen and then you can see it. So during Luther's time at Warburg Castle, he translated the New Testament and the Book of Psalms into German. For the first time, Germans could read scripture in their own language without the need of a priest to interpret a Latin Bible. So that was the first thing, and we have talked a little bit about that. The second thing is God is actively present. While Luther was at Warburg Castle, other leaders of the Reformation movement began stepping up. This is a really important thing. We haven't talked too much about this. So Luther wrote, while I slept, the word so greatly weakened the papacy that no prince, papacy, that no prince or emperor ever inflicted such losses upon it. I did nothing. The word did everything. Sometimes we can't see what God is doing until we stop what we are doing. So that's an area we haven't talked about. And then the third thing is that God's strength is more dependable than our own. So Luther did suffer tremendous bouts of spiritual attack at Warburg Castle. I don't think it was, he was just like all happy. His insecurities, his physical ailments left him depressed. They left him sick. At one point, Luther took his knife and carved into the table, I am baptized. And this was Luther's way of affirming his God-given identity and worth when he was assailed by the demons of doubt and despair. Luther reminded himself that he belonged to God, and just as Jesus heard, God was well pleased with him. This gave Luther strength to keep going when his own strength gave out.
Yeah.
So there are I just put 3 questions up here. What can you do during this time of refuge or during this time of COVID-19? We've already talked a little bit about that. Maybe what can the church how can the church offer opportunities to people to hear God's voice, and maybe share a time when it wasn't until you stopped doing that you could truly see what God was doing. So I'll put those in the chat, and I think somebody shared. Let me stop sharing.
Did she say what you wanted?
And Barbara said, in case you're interested, Casper Nutzel was the translator of the 95 Thesis. Thank you, Barbara. She clarified that. Okay. So any thoughts on those items? Again, I think we kind of talked about the first one, but maybe not the other two. Joanna, go ahead. And then Ray. Sorry, I didn't see your hand, Ray.
I think one thing the church can do, it is doing, are several things. We have continued to have church service. We've adapted to the requirements. And then this group, for me, is very important. I gained so much from reading the books and from listening to our leaders, Dana and Faith, and each other. I think that's been very important during this time. And I know there are other groups that are going on. I think our church is doing the best it can. Maybe there could be more meetings, and I know there are meetings I don't go to on Zoom. So that's my thought.
Okay, thank you. Ray, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to point it out that it may seem like a big deal, the fact that he translated it into German, and in a lot of ways, obviously it was. But let's remember that 90% of the population were peasants and couldn't read to begin with. So the only people who would have been able to read that, even in German, would have been the educated. And you want to talk about a time and a place where income distribution was incredibly out of balance. Then that was one of those where. So the fact that, and I'm sure that ultimately translating it into German, probably pretty quickly, resulted in the word being carried on, because the influential people who would have been able to make those changes to begin with, this wasn't a peasant revolution. This was the societal and the economic hierarchy that created it. And I'm sure there were a lot of other background, and John Conklin can tell us all about the background forces that were at play regarding dissatisfaction with the Catholic Church at that time. But so yeah, I think it's wonderful that he did that translation. It kind of adds to his legacy, which is incredible to begin with. So, yeah.
But I think, as we said before, Faith mentioned that too. They couldn't read, but I think still probably in the society, they finally saw, somebody does something against the oppressive church, and would rather help him out than trying to kill him.
Paul, go ahead, and then Willeen, and then I think Jonathan.
So from Wikipedia, again, what was occurring after this was that there actually were peasant revolts. This was more economic and societal, but it's something that that Luther actually dealt with, because he brought people back to a focus on God, and it really settled people down quite a bit. But the resistance to the power structure, such as it was bubbling all the time. So,
Willeen, and then Jonathan. Go ahead, Willeen.
Over how long of a period was Luther doing this? It seems like he accomplished so much by doing both the New Testament and Psalms. And if he happened to be depressed and all, I just don't see how he was able to do it.
He translated
of years.
No, it was while he was spending those months at the castle.
Just months?
Yeah, he did the New Testament and Psalms, and he wrote many other books and tracts.
That's amazing.
At the same time.
Accomplished all that.
Yeah, and I just did a quick search. So he was born in 1483. He was ordained in 1507. He began teaching in 1512. He died in 1546. And Faith's point, he was married to Katharina von Bora
Mhm.
from 1525 to 1546.
Yeah, but look at the time, and I think the book mentions it, what he was doing while he was in refuge at that castle. That so in 10 months, he completed more than a dozen works. That's page 88.
It's
The
just
most important of which was the translation of the New Testament and the Book of Psalms into German. So
pretty
in
remarkable.
10 months, he was translating the Bible, the Book of Psalms, and writing dozens of other books.
So he, and like I just did the math real quick. So he died at 63 and he got married to Katharina at 42.
Hmm.
So just to kind of give you an idea. Jonathan, I think you were up. Nope. Yeah, you're good.
I got unmuted.
Good.
I'd like to quickly point out that there was an attempt to do this earlier, which the church squashed. My timing is right. That was Joan of Arc. She basically said, the Holy Spirit's told me what to do, and I didn't have to get it from the church. And that scared the church so much they burned her at the stake. And so the resistance was there, powerfully there. When Luther did it, the circumstances were different. The Lord had created a different environment, and it took off. Now, one of the things I would like to mention is, what is it like when you're in this refuge? This happens to me a lot. I've noticed several things. One is when I'm charging off in a certain direction, the Lord will stop me dead in my tracks and say, no, go that direction. So I do that. Another thing that I've experienced is prioritization. I'll have these ideas of all these things that need to be done, and I'm just overwhelmed. And the Lord will give me a sense of priority of what's the next thing that needs to be done. Oh, I hadn't thought about that. And so I'm very grateful for this constant guidance. And it comes from being open to receiving what you can during your refuge period, even if it's just a daily prayer.
Ruth, go ahead. No, unmute yourself. Did you unmute yourself? Oh, wait, there you go. Go ahead.
Sorry. I have a question for Jonathan. So when you say that the Lord guides you and informs you what to do next, how do you know? How does he tell you?
Or she. Or good.
Unmute.
Go ahead. Yeah, go.
This has been a process I've learned over many years. My good friends in Pentecostal Holiness Church taught me how to relate to the Holy Spirit. And in that process, I've learned how to listen to my prayers, feel my body, and I've got a process that works now very well for me, where it's almost like intuition. I don't necessarily hear a voice, but I'll be looking at several alternatives, and one of them will stand out as the right way to do it. That's one way to put it. And that happened to me this morning. So this is what I call inner friendship. And it's like riding a bicycle. Once you learn how to do it, you can do it very well. And so I encourage everybody to have a prayer life where they're actually listening and they receive messages. They test them to see if they're really from God or some selfish source. And then they do it. And when you do it and you receive answered prayer, things work out in this new way you hadn't thought about. Give thanks for that. And what happens to me is I get a warm feeling like you're welcome. And that helps cement this inner friendship. So that's my answer, Ruth, when you ask me how this works.
Okay. It's just funny. I was looking at it. June wrote, it sounds like the Reformation was a long, slow burn. If it went from Joan of Arc to Luther, then Calvin, a contemporary of Luther, then Wesley, wasn't until the 1700s. Yeah, and I looked, like Joan of Arc died in 1431. Luther was born in 1483, died in 1546. Calvin was born in 1509, died 20 years after Luther, 1564. And Wesley was born in the 1700s. What happened to this in the 1600s? There's got to be somebody in the 1600s.
The Renaissance.
Oh, okay.
Well, and you know, it didn't end with Wesley. I mean, and the Reformation, in a sense, didn't end with Wesley. And then our own denomination went through several reformations there, and so did some of the other churches. So, and in one sense, it's still going on.
I was gonna say, couldn't you argue that we're in a Reformation right now?
We are in a Reformation.
We better be.
Yeah, I mean, hands down.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, my mom has a painted block of wood that I look at and says, "Be still and know." It's a good thing. You just have to listen to a mom.
Well, I like that phrase, lead, follow, or get out of the way.
Me too. Okay, Jonathan, and then I just want anybody else too, because we're almost at a time boundary. Go ahead, Jonathan.
I'd like to mention that one of the great challenges to Christianity and the church has been the effort to do away with religion altogether. Around 1500, we ended up with this huge revolution against the church and wanting to get the church out of the public square because all they did was give us wrong answers. Copernicus came along and said, no, the church has been saying the sun goes around the earth for 1500 years. We can now show that the earth goes around the sun. So religion's been wrong. Just focus on science. And we've had secular humanism and atheism and a whole movement getting rid of Christian churches and monuments and that sort of thing. That has been a major revolution going on. And in some sense, I think it's running its course, and religion, and for our point of view, Christianity, is making a comeback. Now, people may or may not agree with that, but I think that's what's going on. And people have found it's empty just to rely on human reason. We need God beyond what we can do ourselves. And so there is a back to God movement going on, and I think it's going to get bigger.
Thank you. Barbara, go ahead.
I just wanted to say we hopefully also in a environmental reformation to heal our planet.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So it is 11 o'clock, and I want to be sensitive to everybody's time and other Zooms or other things you have to do. And so if you do need to go, you can certainly go in peace and enjoy your week and stay cool. We can also stay on for a little bit if you have other questions. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now.